live now, so please do not swear. Okay, so welcome everybody. Um, I am so welcome to this GoGN webinar. Last week we were in Vancouver to take part in OpenEd 15. So OpenEd is probably it's one of the biggest open education conferences in the world. Certainly the biggest in North America. And so we were very lucky to be there in person, and this is a bit of a get together to basically go through what we what we experience, or what are the messages to take home, and all bits and pieces. And we're taking questions on Twitter as well, so if anyone has any questions, please tweet using the GoGN OER account. Yeah, okay. So I don't know, guys. Interesting. It was an interesting conference in the sense that there was lots of stuff that not lots of stuff. For me, it was a bit of a mixed bag. So there was lots of interesting sessions, but I also missed not seeing more of other stuff. For instance, I think one of the big things that came out of the conference. So I should have said actually. So the conference was in Vancouver because it was organized by Clint Lalonde from BC Campus and his team, and they have a big initiative, a big open textbooks initiative. So a lot of, even if the general theme, the title of the conference was the impact of open, I think a lot of the conference was based around what was going on with open textbooks, and I think that's very much what dominated the conference in situ in Vancouver, but also on the back channels like Twitter and all that. And it's this idea that how much do we care about open textbooks? Yes, they're having an impact in cost, because the students are saving a lot of money, especially in States and in Canada. But do we care about open textbooks in a different way? Is it all about money? So I don't know, guys. What do you say?
For me, I thought it was a very interesting conference. There were two kind of strands, I think, that came through for me. That might be because just the sessions I went to. And I didn't go to a lot of things around policy, for instance. So policy might have been another big strand. But there was, as you say, there was the open textbooks kind of strand, and I was really impressed with the quality of the research we're beginning to see with open textbooks now. And sort of, when we set up the OER Research Hub, one of the reasons for setting it up was because there wasn't good quality evidence around about the impact of OER. And too often what you'd see were just papers saying this stuff will have an impact, and these are the things it will do, without ever kind of evaluating that. And now we were getting really good quality research done. So I went to a few presentations where people had kind of controlled for the different variables. They're tested pre-knowledge before they'd implemented OER, then they're tested after OER had been implemented. They kind of looked across different demographics and kind of stuff, and so they could then say, as much as you can do in education, any improvement was down to the implementation of OER. So we were finding at least the no difference phenomena, no significant difference phenomena. So introducing OER didn't cause students to do worse, and if you're saving the money, because here this is always about open textbooks, so they're not buying books then. So if you're saving the money, then you may as well go with the option that doesn't cost them anything. But often there would be an improvement in performance, a slight improvement in performance, and an improvement in retention came up quite a lot. So retention became quite a big theme, that they were getting more students to stay with a course. And so the other theme, so open textbooks and good quality research around them was one theme, and the other theme was kind of much more around kind of critical discussion of kind of almost postmodern analysis of what it means, what openness means. So quite a kind of abstract theoretical discussion. And I think you could argue they're almost like two different camps. So it's a shame Rob's not here because I think he's got some interesting thoughts on this and was going to blog about it, how you're almost getting these two slightly diverging groups within open education. Now, maybe it's just, I think people probably have a preference for one or the other. Actually, I really liked both of those groups. I really liked proper hardcore research. You could say, yes, this is really good. And I really liked having the time to kind of discuss and think of what it means to be open. So I'd really hate for those two groups to diverge. I wouldn't want to go to a conference that only had one of those elements, I think. It's a good thing to have both in one place. So I'll end there, and maybe Beck can come in with her thoughts.
Hi, yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute. Yeah, I'd kind of echo Martin's kind of description of the conference. One of the things I think it raises the kind of issue of where research is going around openness, maybe. So there's, as Martin said, there's some great studies kind of out there where things are controlled, and it's clearly, it's clear where you can see OER is making the impact, say in retention, and the Z degree is one example. The guys at Tidewater have done some really good research around that. There's a lot of really good stuff coming out of the Open Education Group, and obviously they've got a lot of open research fellows that are going to be working on researching different areas of OER and publishing over the coming months. So we should see a kind of big wave of the kind of research that was that Martin described coming out of those, from those guys shortly. I think there's a kind of interesting. I think it's kind of interesting to think about where we're going in terms of research methods and consistency of research methods, maybe kind of how we go about researching outside of the kind of tightly controlled study. Because obviously it's great to have the tightly controlled studies where you're working with one cohort of students and you can really ensure that, variables aren't you can ensure consistency and that, and everything else, which allows these studies to take place. But I think there's some really interesting kind of work that can be done where it's not so clear what method. So for example, in the wild OER that's been remixed. So one of the kind of things is, okay, we're at a phase where we've got a lot of, there's a real traction in the US, in North America, with using open textbooks and of researching in the way that, we've been talking about. But then what happens when people start remixing textbooks, for example, and things like this? And I think Rob and I had a conversation with various people. We were talking about this last week. Once you start remixing, the formula for kind of looking at the impact kind of changes. Can you really say it's the same textbook, the textbook that's making the difference? And so I think there's some interesting questions for going forward in thinking about research and consistency and how we go about researching different types of OER. So that was my kind of thought. So I'll turn it over because I think Rob will probably have more to say on this as well as pick up on some of the stuff about openness, which I think was another important strand. So there was a couple of good talks on Friday. Roland Moe gave a very good presentation, and there was also a paper around. I've forgotten what it was now. It's terrible. Let me just look on the program.
Not yetness, was that the one you're thinking
of?
That's
it, yes, thank you. So, thanks, Martin. Yeah, so the not yetness paper as well. So there were a few of these kind of lines of discussion that were coming out, but I think Rob's, as Martin said, has probably got more to say than I have on this at the moment. So I'll pass over to Rob.
I don't think Rob can speak, not kind of not through any biological impairment, but because technologically, rather, I don't think he can. For some reason, it's coming into the chat, but it's not. He can only view us. So, hello, Rob. So I'll speak on Rob's behalf. I think you raised there were a couple of points I should pick up from what you said, Beck. So first of all, the work coming out of Tidewater I thought was very interesting. So Tidewater have introduced this thing called the Z degree. So the idea is the zero cost is spent on textbooks. But what they've really done is they've used open textbooks OER as a tool that allows them to completely restructure their courses. So they've created courses that are quite similar to, even though they're on campus, they're quite similar to Open University, distance ed type courses in a way. So they're completely online, everything's self-contained, there's lots of guidance around what you need to do. And the open textbooks kind of relates very specifically to the learning objectives in the course. Whereas beforehand they were just using a textbook, and that textbook, either they were forcing the course to kind of meet the textbook because they felt guilty about making students buy it, or the textbook didn't actually meet the learning objectives of the course that closely. So they were getting really good improvement rates, really good performance improvement rates. But you could argue that the OER was the kind of least interesting part of that transformation. In a way, it was the learning design transformation that they undertook that was more important. But even that's interesting, because it might be that OER and open textbooks in this case are the thing that allows a fairly small college like that to construct these courses where they wouldn't be able to afford to spend that kind of amount of time in learning design and instructional design. Otherwise, they didn't have an existing kind of open textbooks that they could transform. So, just to speak to Beck's point, that it makes kind of methodology difficult, because you can't say the effect was exactly down to OER, because you could say actually there are a number of variables in there that are kind of confounded. But certainly OER are a part of that, and we kept having discussions. And if Rolf could speak, he would talk about kind of how the kind of medical metaphor came up quite a lot. So it's like trying to test the effect of a drug, but I mean that's problematic in medicine a lot of the time. I think it's even more problematic in education, because there are so many other kind of confounding variables. But I still think we're getting good quality, even with like the title stuff, where you might say there's other bits in the mix. You can still point to that and say, look, this is OER was the intervention here, even if other things went along at the same time, and OER facilitated that change in how it worked.
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to think of another great case study that came out and that was presented on the conference was UMUC, University of Maryland University College, where these guys have moved to a completely 100% OER e-resources for all of their undergraduate courses and their postgrad courses from next year, and looking at the cost savings and the other impacts that that's having. And that paper was excellent. I think all of the papers, any presentations that people were making at OpenEd should be available on the SlideShare. They're going to collate them all together. So there's a lot of great stuff in there if you're interested in particular. But there's, as Martin said, there's some excellent research coming out from different places and from individual researchers as well.
Just to say, because I think on the live stream people don't get the text chat, so Dimitar has joined us, but he can't come in via mic because he's at work. So he's made the point in the text about OER textbooks and how in the US we've got lots of case studies, but less so in Europe. So in Poland they're starting to look at this, but he mentions there have been pushback from the commercial publishers, and I know Cable Green's been involved in some of that kind of policy work with them. And Slovenia have got a strategy to introduce open textbooks. I think there is a kind of interesting, I think it speaks to what Bayer was saying, interesting thing about how much open textbooks are OER, and that was a theme that came up quite a lot. Some people really pushed back. So was it Robin DeRose who wrote a good blog post about, open textbooks, it's kind of like, is this the best we can do, kind of replacing something that's a bit mediocre anyway. And so the argument is that open textbooks are a good way into the open education OER field, because people understand what they are. They're kind of like an entry drug. But other people were saying, well, it just means we'll end up replicating the same thing over again. But certainly I think in Europe, this obsession, you might call it, with open textbooks is not the same, because the driving factor for it in the US is cost mainly. It's down to that their textbooks just cost so much, and up to like kind of 25% of a degree spent on these really expensive textbooks. And I don't think that's quite the case in Europe. I don't think we haven't got the figures, I don't think, but I don't think it's such a high percentage. So that motivation to invest in open textbooks projects is absent. So for us, OER are often much more about online resources. And if you're looking at online resources, then I don't think the driving factor would be money so much, but it might well be more things like retention and pedagogic flexibility and those kind of things.
Can I bring you back for 1 second to what Beth was talking about, the methodology, and yes, it is true that we're seeing like a good number of good research pieces on the impact of open textbooks, or looking at OER from the perspective of open textbooks. But there's one thing that I think is basic in terms of the methodology. So the idea from all these guys has been to, so how can you isolate the impact of it's very much about isolating that variable, as this is exactly the impact of open textbooks on learning. And yes, you have to have into account, you have to bear in mind, the style, the teacher, the students, the context, and all these bits and pieces. But and yes, more research is needed like that, and yes, but it's very much about being able to replicate this kind of research. And in replicating, if anyone is going to replicate that kind of research, it's not only about having access to the data, but it's about having access to the methodology, and about knowing exactly what these guys did exactly with their methodology. See what I mean? And I think that's what's not really been shared at the moment, as far as I know. So, like in terms of, well, tell me exactly what you were looking at, what were your variables, and how did you analyze these? What kind of analysis did you do, so that I will be able to replicate the same thing if I wanted to. So that's one thing. The other thing is that there was a comment from John Hilton III saying that yes, of course, there's more research needed, and he pointed researchers towards efficacy. So that's a big word again in relation to open textbooks. So it's like efficacy, and then basically you have to, what he was saying is like, there has to be more research, as in we have to understand what does a faculty or what does a teacher mean when they say when they talk about efficacy. So does this book work for me? Yes, but why is it working for you in your class? And I think that's actually very, very interesting, because I don't think it is something that you can pinpoint, in a sense that it's something that might work for me and my students in my own context, but then the same textbooks you don't think is going to be efficient in your own situation. So it's again more kind of educational research. So it's going to be again more messy, or as messy as it is now. Sorry.
No, yeah. I think so. A couple of us went on to Thompson Rivers University for a couple of days afterwards, and Beck and Rob were on a panel there, and we're talking about open research. And I think part of what you're getting at, Bear, is the kind of difference. So there's researching into open education, and there's researching in an open manner as well. I think those are two different things. So you can do research into open education in a traditional manner, if you like. Whereas there wasn't an awful lot about the kind of open education practice, I think, there, kind of how you go about doing this in an open manner, which I think maybe is what you're getting at, Bayer. Yeah, and the efficacy stuff was very strong. It's like that's part of this thing, like it's almost treating it like a medical trial. And so I think it's less clear what we mean in this case, but I think it's important to try and push at that, and we should keep trying to do that, because that's the kind of stuff, if you really want OER to make a breakthrough, it's like being able to say, look, we can point to this research over here, and it kind of has these benefits when it was implemented like this, and whether that's cost, retention, improvement, student satisfaction, those kind of, exactly as we had with the kind of OER hub hypotheses. So I think if we were doing the OER hub again with our 11 hypotheses, then there was quite a lot there that coming out that would fit into those sort of. So one of those 11, I think. So I think we're beginning, and that was the whole point really. It was a maturing field, and I think you're beginning to see that sense of maturity come through. But yeah, it's interesting because as a field matures, you get to discuss kind of its direction, and so so there are two things like OER, open textbook shouldn't be all we mean by OER, and efficacy shouldn't be all we mean by OER research. But they're both still really interesting and important things to do, I think.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, have I unmuted? Sorry. And I think with open textbooks, because you can use, so I was trying to make this point badly, I think, earlier, but like often people adopt, first of all, the open textbook, the whole textbook, or they're using, that's the only thing that they're using for their course. And once you get to the stage, which many people kind of do that when they first start using the open textbook, but will then later say, well, next year I'm planning on kind of, maybe adding in other material, or maybe remixing it, or maybe I'll work with my students to kind of develop it, and so on. And that kind of, there's a question there for how we go about researching the impact of those kind of variations of the textbook. So it's kind of like, it's open textbooks, but it's kind of more than that. They're kind of a gateway to kind of developing open practices, and kind of, thinking about the 5 R's and like remixing and stuff like there is a kind of sense that some people go on to kind of do those things. People are more likely to, I was giving a presentation about some of the research that we've been doing with OpenStax as part of OpenEd, and one of the things when we asked people about behaviours and what people were more likely to do in the future, 3/4 of the people that we surveyed at the end of last year, early 2015, told us that they would, they'd be more likely to use OER in the future because of the experience that they'd have of using the OpenStax textbook. So there's very much a sense that there's a gateway to, using other OER and maybe kind of doing things like remixing and developing, and that kind of brings up questions for how you go about researching that type of impact, and that in a way it's not just open textbooks, it's kind of, there's a conduit into a whole new kind of, so people would say things like, oh, now I'm kind of look for more open access materials. Obviously it's not true of everybody, but there is a sense that some people go on to develop, to kind of develop in that direction.
I'd just say someone's posted a link on Twitter that you might want to post out under the GoGN account that gives costs of, so it asks students at different universities how much they spend on different things, including going out and Largo and stuff. This is how much you spend on books, and this is in the UK. And the answer seemed to be sort of between zero, because they say everything's in the library they need, and about £100 per term, which I think does indicate that it isn't such a big cost driver in the UK. Certainly not those, and perhaps it's because we don't tie our courses as closely in with textbooks, and it's not driven so much around that teaching. So yeah, so open textbooks are unlikely to be such a big driver in the UK, because part of the thing there is that you can make that claim very quickly. You can save your students, sort of $1,000 by going open, and I think that's almost like a driver to get in and make that kind of change. But I don't think we have that here.
Okay, I'm gonna bring in a comment from Rob, who has emailed, and he says this. So there's a couple of things that he would like to talk about if he was able to talk actually. But he says this. The first thing is that he would highlight is the palpable emergence of two cultures in open education, right? So the higher education colonizers who want to replace resources, especially textbooks, with an open version, but not necessarily change much else, right? This is a great idea. The colonizers, yes, replace, but not change much else. And then the more radical end of the spectrum, interested in empowering and freedoms, which was less evident in the conference. He says it's true, and I don't know. I would invite everyone to read. So there's been great blog posts. If you actually go to the OpenEd website and you click on the archive link, there is so Clint has been collecting a lot of what has been the action like during the conference and post-conference. So he's got a link to a series of blog posts, and there's one by Rajiv. I forget Rajiv's second name. Sorry, from BC Campus, and he writes about open textbooks as well. But he's got this great metaphor about, he's using the metaphor of the pencil and this idea of the innovators, but then the huge majority of people, in mainstream, who would just adopt open textbooks, for instance, when they, if they give it to me, I'll use it. I'll replace replace traditional textbook with an open textbook. But that's as much as I'm gonna do. So it kind of it just sorry, Rob's comment reminded me of that. So by all means, go and read it. It's very, very good. It's better explained than the way I'm explaining it now. Anyway, and then the second comment from Rob, it's again. He says great progress by the efficacy studies contingent. I think they fit into the colonizers group and should be recognized they should be recognized for contributing to their successes in the USA. We need to make sure this isn't the only thing we focus on, as several people in the conference have noticed. So yes, there's part of efficacy, but it's not just efficacy that we need to look at. Yeah. Let me see. There was something else from Rob, so I'll come back to you in a second.
Okay, I'm just thinking of Rob also mentioned that we should say about how well attended the conference was. That about 550 people there, of which about half were first timers. So it kind of shows that it's a growing field. Although it was interesting, I think. In your session, Bayer, you asked, is anyone here from the Global South? And there was a deafening silence. So it's a very kind of North American-centric conference, which is in quite contrast, I think, to the OE Global Conference, which, as its name suggests, has a much more kind of global cohort to go to it. So I think we were there from Europe. Some of the Royal 4D people were there from South Africa. But apart from that, it was nearly all US and Canada there. Which might again indicate why there was such a kind of preponderance of open textbook stuff there. But it's a very well organised conference. I enjoyed it. Lots of good chat and lots of good people to meet there. So if everyone does get a chance to go to it, I'd recommend it. And makes a good contrast with OE Global, I think, in a way. So we kind of have those two big conferences during the year now, and of course the OER one in the UK, which is kind of more about the UK OER community, but increasingly international as well.
Can I ask you guys one thing? Because it's great going to one of these conferences, right? Because there's lots of interesting sessions you can choose from, and there's also it's more like conversations we have with people. But can I ask you, is there anything that you missed, in a sense? Is there anything that you were surprised there wasn't more of? Because for instance, in my case, I was very surprised how little attention is being given to, and maybe it was just this year because I don't know, it happened this year, but I was very surprised about how little attention is given to discussing what's going on in OER in schools in K-12, in a sense that yes, we hear about the K-12 collaborative project, which is again about adopting open textbooks, and there was somebody else again looking at open textbooks, how teachers actually look at, how teachers evaluate the different open textbooks. But other than that, there was there was very, very little to do with the schools, how OER are using in schools. So which I think it's slightly disappointing, I think, because you plan to see it at school level and then it grows all the way to higher education. But anyway, so is there anything that you missed, for instance, that you were surprised nobody talked about?
I wondered if I just didn't go to the K-12 ones, so maybe I missed that strand, but apart from that, I'd agree with you. I think the thing that I didn't see much of mentioned as a term or talks about it was open educational practice. So I think if you were to compare it with the OER 15 conference, which we ran in Cardiff in April this year, there was a lot more talk there about open educational practice, so kind of what you do around open education. And I didn't really see that much there, and perhaps I don't know whether that's more of a UK term or whether that wasn't the focus of the conference.
Yeah, I suppose the informal side of stuff. So and there were smatterings of stuff, but some of the kind of more in the wild kind of creation of stuff that people are doing would have been interesting. I mean, the theme, I was just looking back to check to the theme of the conference was the impact of OER. So I guess the biggest amount of where we're really seeing impact is in the kind of HE and college sectors. So that might be why. But yeah.
On themes, interesting, I went to a talk by David Kernahan from JISC, and he'd analysed 11 years of open ed papers and sort of looking at the type of topics they'd covered and sort of plotted them over that 11-year time frame. And he said that the theme of a conference, or the themes, make almost no difference to what papers are submitted to a conference. And but it's funny, every conference you go to has themes. And I did the same when we were organising OER 15. So, okay, what themes are we going to have? But they make absolutely no difference to the paper that people submit. And I think if you think about your own practice, that's true. It's more like I've got a paper to submit, and then you force it into a theme. So I think just an interesting side point is why do we persist with the idea of themes of a conference when they have no influence whatsoever?
Okay. I'm not sure if anybody else has any more comments about open ed, but I'm curious to learn about what happened in Camp Loops, guys. So do you have any comments on that?
What happens in Kamloops stays in Kamloops. No, so a few of us went on to Thompson Rivers University, as I said, afterwards, which is in Kamloops. So we had a good session there. So I think that was a bit more of this kind of unstructured sort of stuff that I think Beck was talking about. So I was interested in the stuff. So Tom Woodward from Richmond, Virginia, and Alan Levine from the Internets were kind of demonstrating kind of interesting tools and things to play with, which was really fun actually. And so Tom had the ways of making WordPress really easy for people to use by just creating forms through is it the Jetpack plugin, and which kind of got people so people could just be out and upload pictures and stuff straight into it, and it was a really good way to kind of lower that barrier to participation, and playing around with things like timelines and stuff like that. So that felt quite good. That was quite nice, kind of, sort of just hacking stuff really and playing around with things. What else do? So I gave a presentation on digital scholarship, did that gig, and then David Kernan, Vivian Rolfe, Rob and Beck were on a panel about open education. And then the next day was interesting. We had some presentations from Thompson Rivers. They were talking about their use of e-portfolios, but using WordPress to do those things, which I thought was interesting because I've got quite a lot of reservations about e-portfolios, partly because we get students to use these tools that we create ourselves in universities, and then they never use them again, and all the stuff is kind of locked away. Whereas I think if you're using a blog or WordPress, even if it's a bit artificial in a way, at least it's a tool you might then go on to use that would be representative of, and you'll be developing your online identity. So it was good to talk to them, I think, and there's some interesting things we could do together. I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that those few days back.
Yeah, I thought some of the tools were cool. There's something called TapeWrite, which is in beta format at the moment, where you can kind of almost insert pictures and bits of text and do cool things with audio that you've got, and I thought that was really good. So I'm going to be testing that. There was also some really cool, as Martin said, people using WordPress in their courses, and somebody was presenting on a course that they do with hacking. Oh, I can't remember exactly now. Internet. It was to do with basically like creating a space where people could practice.
Ethical hacking was the term we used. Ethical hacking. Yeah.
And that was really interesting. I thought some of the stuff that those guys are doing was really good. There's a hashtag #OpenUpTrue actually that you can find. A lot of people were posting links to things that have been talked about and stuff there, so it's worth kind of going back. Rob also recorded the session, so there was a panel session with myself, Rob, David Kernahan, Viv Rolfe, and Tanis Morgan, where we were talking about open research, so kind of the open research, the practice of being research in the open, and to do with where we're at in terms of researching OER. But it morphed into a wider kind of discussion about various other topics. But there's a recording of that, which I'm trying to find the link to, so I'll post it in a second. But yeah, that was good. And then Martin did a talk about Battle for Open and Digital Scholar kind of mashup as well. So yeah, there was loads of good sessions and really great people. So it was a really good event.
Okay, I need to head off soon, just so people know. So if there's anything you want to wrap up with, Bea?
Yeah, no, I was gonna just ask Dimitra if you had any questions, but if not, yeah, I think overall it was a great conference. Huge thanks to Clint Lalonde and his team for organizing this, and we had a great time. It's great, it really.
So Dimitar says he's got a short question. Go for it, Dimitar.
Sorry. What's the role of the Open Knowledge Foundation in the OER area? What's the role of the Open Knowledge Foundation in the OER area? Actually, that's a question for. I would ask Javier Atenas, for instance. I don't really know. Does anybody know?
No, I don't know what formally it is. It's interesting. We went to the Open Knowledge Festival a couple of years ago, and it made me appreciate that open education is quite a small part of that area, and actually it's a lot more about open data and kind of open citizenship, open government, and kind of using it to hold people to account and stuff. And open education was really almost a kind of peripheral player in that, and I think we get used to thinking of open education as the big player because that's the kind of area we go to. But I'm not sure what the formal link is. I think that's a good question to ask, actually. Let us find out and get back to you.
Okay, so let's do that. Yeah, my question is how to use the open data for open textbooks. I think if you're gonna talk open data, you're gonna have to talk to Javier Atenas or Leo Haverman. They probably know because they've been working on that for quite a while now. So we will leave it. This is it, guys. Thank you very much for coming and for your contributions, Dimitra. Thank you so much, Beck, Martin. Thank you everyone who's going to watch the recording online, and we'll be in touch soon. Bye.
Thanks.
Thanks everyone. Bye.